In 1945, as Allied tanks were entering Berlin, a Swiss bank had just completed the largest transfer in its history. It was not for the Allies. It was not for the Nazis. It was for the same interests that had financed both sides since 1939. What you are about to hear today does not appear in the history books you read in school. And there is a reason for that. Welcome. I am a financial researcher who has spent more than 2 decades studying capital movements during times of war. And let me tell you something I learned after reviewing thousands of declassified documents. World War II was not won only by soldiers in the trenches. It was won by bankers in Zurich offices, accountants in New York, and corporate executives who appeared in photographs with Churchill and later dined with German industrialists. Today, we are going to talk about real money, about gold that never appeared in official inventories, about companies that sold to both sides, and about the financial network that survived intact when everything else collapsed. Because at the end of this war, there were military winners and structural winners. And the structural winners never lost anything. Before we continue, you need to understand something fundamental. In 1939, the most important bank in the United States had offices operating inside Nazi Germany. In 1943, those offices were still open. In 1945, they were not shut down. They were rewarded. How is that possible? Because the war you saw in movies is not the war that existed in accounting books. And that difference explains everything. Stay with me. This gets better. Let's start with Switzerland. Everyone knows Switzerland was neutral during World War II. But neutral does not mean inactive. It means doing business with everyone. Between 1939 and 1945, Swiss banks handled more than $1.3 billion in gold. To put that into perspective, today that would equal roughly $20 billion. Where did that gold come from? Part of it came from legitimate German reserves. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, held significant deposits before the war. But another, darker portion came from gold teeth, rings, jewelry, and property confiscated from millions of Holocaust victims. The Nazis needed to convert that gold into foreign currency to purchase raw materials: tungsten from Portugal, oil from neutral companies, food from Argentina. And Swiss banks did not ask questions. In fact, they developed an entire system of certificates that cleaned the origin of the gold. But here is where it gets interesting. The Allies used those same banks as well. The United States, Britain, and France deposited gold in Switzerland to pay for covert operations, diplomatic bribes, and intelligence purchases. Secret agents needed funds. Resistance movements in occupied countries needed financing. Scientists defecting from the Axis needed incentives. All of it was paid from numbered accounts in Geneva and Zurich. Literally, Nazi gold and Allied gold sat in the same vaults, separated only by account numbers. And the banks charged commissions to both sides. Swiss banking executives knew exactly what was happening. Internal documents, letters exchanged between branch directors, show they were fully aware of the origin of the gold they received. But their argument was simple. We are neutral. We do not judge. We only provide financial services. It is the perfect argument when everyone is paying you. When the war ended, secret negotiations took place. The United States pressured Switzerland to return part of the stolen gold. Do you know how much they returned? Less than 10%. The rest remained in private accounts, trusts, and legal structures that still exist today. Many of those accounts were never claimed because their original owners had died in concentration camps. That money was simply absorbed into the Swiss banking system. Swiss banks did not lose the war. The war was their best decade. And it laid the foundation for turning Switzerland into the most powerful tax haven of the 20th century. Now let's talk about corporations, because this is where the story becomes truly uncomfortable. During the war, American companies such as Ford, General Motors, and IBM operated factories inside Germany. And those factories did not shut down when the United States entered the war in 1941. They kept producing. And they were not producing pots or toys. They were producing military equipment. Ford manufactured military trucks for the Wehrmacht. Not civilian trucks adapted for war, vehicles designed specifically to military specifications approved by German High Command. General Motors produced engines for Nazi fighter planes through its subsidiary Opel. The Messerschmitt fighters that battled British and American pilots used components manufactured by an American company. IBM provided the tabulation systems the Nazis used to organize censuses, deportations, and the logistics of the Holocaust. IBM's Hollerith machines allowed the Nazis to track entire populations, identify Jews, catalog prisoners, and optimize train transportation to extermination camps. IBM did not merely sell the machines. Through its European subsidiaries, it provided technical maintenance, training, and punch cards throughout the war. Were these companies punished after the war? They were compensated. After 1945, the U.S. government paid them war damage compensation for their factories in Germany, the same factories that had been producing weapons for the enemy. Let me repeat that. They were paid for damage to facilities that had helped the enemy. This is not conspiracy theory. It appears in U.S. Treasury Department documents declassified in the 1990s. But there is more. Standard Oil, the Rockefeller Oil Company, had agreements with the German chemical conglomerate IG Farben. IG Farben was an industrial giant producing everything from pharmaceuticals to explosives. It also produced Zyklon B, the gas used in extermination chambers. Standard Oil sold IG Farben synthetic fuel patents that allowed the Nazis to keep their war machine running even when the Allies blocked natural oil routes. These patent agreements were especially valuable. Germany had no domestic oil fields, but with synthetic fuel technology it could convert coal into gasoline for tanks and aircraft. Without that technology, the Nazi war machine would have stopped much earlier. And part of that technology came from an American company. After the war, IG Farben executives were tried at Nuremberg. Several were convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Not a single American partner was investigated. In fact, many of those American executives received medals and recognition for their contribution to the Allied war effort. The same individual could hold a U.S. government medal while his European subsidiaries had been working for Hitler. Because these networks were not loyal to any side. They were loyal to the system. And the system survived. War was a business. And good businesses do not take sides. They diversify. There was another key player few people mention: Latin American banks. During the war, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile became alternative financial hubs. Nazi officials sent money to accounts in Buenos Aires. German businessmen bought property in Sao Paulo. European industrialists set up shell companies in Santiago. All of this was documented, but difficult to prosecute legally because these countries were technically neutral, or nominally allied, but governed by regimes sympathetic to the Axis. Argentina is the best-known case. Juan Perón, who would later become president, had close relationships with German officers. After the war, Argentina became a refuge for fleeing Nazis, but also for their money. Bank accounts opened during the war remained active for decades. Some even financed post-war political movements in Europe and Latin America. If this information is opening your eyes, if you are beginning to see history differently, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. We do not create superficial content here. We investigate deeply, using documents, data, and truths others do not tell you. Subscribe and activate notifications. This is only beginning. Now let's talk about the gold that officially never existed. In 1944, before the war even ended, the Allies met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design the post-war financial system. That is where the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created. That conference is famous. It appears in every economics textbook. But what few people know is that there were parallel meetings. Meetings without official records. Meetings where decisions were made about recovered German gold, confiscated assets, and the fortunes of European collaborators. These meetings do not appear in the official Bretton Woods records. But we know they happen because there are indirect references in Treasury Department memoranda, in personal diaries of participants, and in documents declassified decades later. In those meetings, decisions were made involving hundreds of tons of gold. Much of that gold never returned to its original owners. It was redistributed, used to create monetary stabilization funds. channeled into central banks of countries needing reconstruction, integrated into the new global financial system the United States was building. And here is the key detail. That gold was cleaned. Its origins were erased. It was melted down, assigned new serial numbers, and converted into legitimate reserves. The process was technically legal. The Allies argued they were recovering assets stolen by the Nazis and redistributing them to stabilize Europe. But the problem was that there was no clear system to identify original owners. Millions of people had died. Entire communities had been destroyed. Who do you return the gold of a Polish Jewish family to when the entire family was murdered and property records no longer exist? This is not speculation. In the early 2000s, an international commission investigated the fate of Nazi gold. They found that more than 200 tons of gold were never accounted for. They simply disappeared from records between 1945 and 1950. Where is it? No one knows for certain. But the most likely answer is that it sits inside central bank reserves under new serial numbers and certifications. Gold has no memory. It has no DNA. Once it is melted, it cannot be traced. And that is exactly what makes it perfect for laundering history. But there was more than gold. There was art. Thousands of paintings, sculptures, jewels, ancient manuscripts. The Nazis looted museums, private collections, and churches. Much of that art was recovered by the Allies. But not all of it was returned. Some pieces ended up in American and British museums. Others were quietly sold to private collectors. Provenance records were conveniently lost. Even today, every few years a news story emerges about a valuable painting discovered to have Nazi origins. Each time, there is a legal battle over rightful ownership. And most of the time, the heirs of victims lose, because after 80 years, proving ownership is nearly impossible when original documents were destroyed. So who were the true winners of World War II? Militarily, the Allies. Politically, the United States and the Soviet Union. But structurally, the networks won. Banks that financed both sides emerged stronger. Corporations that produced for everyone became larger. Financial systems that absorbed stolen gold became more consolidated. And most importantly, those networks survived intact. They did not just survive. They became the foundation of the post-war global order. Bretton Woods was not a new beginning. It was the legalization of structures that already existed. It took informal wartime networks and turned them into formal peacetime institutions. That is why 80 years later, the same banks remain the most powerful. The same families control the same fortunes. The same mechanisms of creative accounting continue to operate. The difference is that now they have respectable names. They are no longer numbered Swiss accounts. They are investment funds in Luxembourg. They are no longer German subsidiaries of American companies. They are multinational corporations with complex legal structures. Because war destroyed countries, cities, and millions of lives. But it did not destroy capital. Capital simply changed hands. And the hands that received it were the same hands that moved it during the conflict. There were no good guys versus bad guys in the financial world. There were operators. And operators never lose. Let me give you a concrete example of how these networks operated in practice. Tungsten is an essential metal for ammunition. Without tungsten, you cannot manufacture armor-piercing projectiles. During the war, the main tungsten mines were in Portugal and Spain, neutral countries. The Nazis needed tungsten. The Allies needed it too. And both sides were buying from the same suppliers. Intermediary companies based in Lisbon purchased tungsten from Portuguese mines and sold it to the highest bidder. Some weeks, that bidder was Germany. Other weeks, it was Britain. And sometimes, the same company sold simultaneously to both sides, simply splitting shipments and using different routes. The owners of these intermediary firms were often Swiss or Swedish citizens with financial connections in both London and Berlin. This pattern repeated itself with dozens of raw materials. Rubber from Malaysia, industrial diamonds from South Africa, platinum from Colombia. While soldiers died on the front lines, commodity traders were making the deals of their lives, selling the inputs that kept the war running. And no one stopped them. Because technically, a neutral country has the right to trade with whomever it chooses. And technically, a private company has the right to sell to any buyer. The war had rules. But those rules applied only to men in uniform. For those in suits, it was business as usual. Remember this. Modern wars are not financed with patriotism. They are financed by financial networks that operate before, during, and after the conflict. And those networks never lose. While soldiers fought on the front lines, bankers negotiated behind closed doors. While cities burned, gold crossed borders. While leaders declared victory, accountants erased trails. The history you were taught is the history of battles and generals. The real history is the history of money. And money always finds a way to win. This does not mean the sacrifice of soldiers did not matter. It means another war was happening at the same time. A war not fought with tanks, but with balance sheets, transfers, and secret agreements. And that war never ended. It only changed form. Today, the same dynamics still operate. When there are conflicts in the Middle East, there are banks financing both sides. When tensions rise between superpowers, there are corporations selling to everyone. When international sanctions are imposed, there are financial networks finding ways to bypass them.